Erev Tov Chavrim, I'm Steve Benoon. You're watching Israeli News Live, and we are just looking a lot at Venezuela this evening, and of course a couple of other stories that are breaking. Pakistan getting ready for a war with India, has warned the hospital there. Also, Israel has launched their first rocket into space there, the lunar lander they're going to be sending up there. But the situation in Venezuela seems to be following that like Ukraine, yet another coup. The only difference is this time, it seems like the whole world is very much aware that it's going to be a toppled nation. But, you know, it's kind of ironic. The United States has sent down tons of aid to the border there in Colombia to go into Venezuela. Based on this de facto president that's being installed by the White House, Mr. Guaido. And at the same time, we just got a report out, and this just came out minutes ago in Telsar, that Venezuela announces the arrival of 7.5 tons of medicine, and says the Venezuelan president met with representatives of the health sector from Russia, Cuba, and Pan American health organizations in the Miraflores Palace, head of the state's executive branch, to discuss how to strengthen Venezuela's health system. So the Venezuelan president met with these representatives, and today 7.5 tons of medicine are coming to Venezuela from Russia to continue equipping our country, stated Maduro, before adding that Venezuela has also received 108,428 units of medicine, surgical equipment, and other types of equipment to strengthen the health system. Seems like to me that President Putin is also reaching that helping hand out, and of course Maduro, being the legitimate president of Venezuela, he's the one that's got the right to accept where he gets that help from. Now, once again, I'll tell you, like I've said before, you know, I don't say that Maduro is the great guy, but I think the big issue on why the United States is not very happy with Maduro and why they've been trying to topple this nation is because he's probably cut in on that drug market that some of those politicians in America and deep state that help fund their wars all over the world, it's cutting into their own drug trade trafficking there that funds the billions of dollars that they need to fight wars in other parts of the world using cash, such as funding ISIS, Al-Qaeda, Al-Nusra, and other jihadist interventions around the world, including that of the Ukraine coup. It's an endless flow of money that comes in through the sale of illegal drugs. And in fact, on Patreon, we will be doing a broadcast tomorrow on some very interesting insights that we have discovered recently about the drugs that are coming out of Afghanistan, how they flow, where they go, who's the one that does it, who's the one that funds it, and what the money is being actually used for. So tune in over to patreon.com/Israeli News Live for that broadcast tomorrow. But continuing on here, this interview right here was kind of interesting that was done here. This was done by Euronews, and the journalist is trying to corner President Maduro, but he actually has some very interesting responses. I'll read to you what he says. Listen to what she says to him first.
The situation is very difficult in Venezuela today. There are shortages of medicine. I visited a couple of hospitals, and I've spoken to doctors who have told me that it's not easy to work today to try and help Venezuelans. We've seen the queues for food in the last few years. Do you recognize at least that you do have a problem in your...
Now, if you'll notice, she brings out first that she's been to the hospital. She's talked to the people there. They're just, you know, this is the issue that they're having. They're having a difficult time. They don't have the medical supplies. Looks like, though, that the president didn't waste any time on getting the help that the country needs and getting that shipment in. Watch his response, though.
Serious problem?
Give me the name of a nation, any nation from the third world that doesn't have difficulties, he says.
But at this level, Mr. President, this is very serious.
Give me the name of the nation that doesn't have difficulties to overcome poverty, any country from Latin America. For example, the neighbors of Colombia, the problem is you don't look at Colombia through a magnifying glass. Poverty reaches 70% in Colombia. Misery is at 30%. Over 15 million people have fled Colombia for many years now, but no one pays attention to Colombia.
Más de 15 millones de colombianos han emigrado, pero nadie pone el foco sobre. ¿Por qué pone el foco sobre los problemas?
Why are Venezuelan problems the only ones being focused on? To justify a narrative, a script, which in itself justifies an intervention. An intervention. Why was Libya under the spotlight and then was abandoned soon after, about 5 years ago? Because Libya's situation was harsh and needed to be bombed. Why was Iraq's situation also harsh? And then also those manufactured lies about weapons of mass destruction. They cannot create the argument of weapons of mass destruction with us, that we have weapons. With their use of the narrative, of course, Venezuela has its own issues, and we are trying to solve them. You know, the interesting thing about this, though, is that Venezuela has got the most natural resources of all the countries there in the Middle East. And as I said to you guys before, you know, I had gotten the information from Israel long ago, back in October, that they were trying to put in a de facto president, that was the United States, and overthrow the nation, and already had operatives on the ground, both Israel and the United States working together to topple this nation, to take the oil from the Venezuelan people, and no doubt the gold as well. So, but you know, now the U.S. is playing the good guy. We're going to have Juan Guaido come in there, and this is what really gets me. I mean, think about it, guys. Right now, we have this big investigation in the United States about Russian collusion and Russia's involvement with trying to influence our elections. Well, Israel was trying to influence our elections as well to make sure President Trump got in, but there's this big major issue going on amongst the Democrats about the Russian involvement in our elections. Russian meddling, as they call it, and a lot of other different names as well. But yet the United States continues to get involved in other countries' domestic issues, their own governments, and who is the one to be in charge. In the case here, Maduro, though he's not no altar boy by no means, the United States, though, goes in and declares a de facto president. Just as we were being told about back in October from a private email that we had received that they were going to do this. Is that not meddling in someone else's politics? What's going to be next? Same thing for Syria. We meddle in there. In fact, we start a war. We can't get rid of Bashar al-Assad. Start a war and overthrow the guy instead. Same thing with Iraq. There were no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, but nonetheless, we start a war, overthrow the nation. A lot of things we are doing in this nation, and nobody pays attention. Ukraine was no different. A lot could be said. Anyway, let's move on to some more issues here about Venezuela. We also have Venezuela closes border with Brazil, may do the same with Colombia border, according to Maduro. That's being reported on RT. And then this was interesting right here. Ariel Gold on Twitter posted this here. She's actually the girl in the room there. No coup in Venezuela, Code Pink. She has her own Twitter page called, or Code Pink, a website called Code Pink, that is. But let me just kind of play for you, if I can, this clip here. Get the right spot there. Maybe it only plays on Twitter. Let me go back to it. Oh, I still keep doing the same thing. Let's see. I had pulled this up a moment ago. Someone had shared that with me. At any rate, I seem to have made a mistake on trying to do that, so it's probably not going to work. But regardless, they were doing they broke into a meeting that is supportive of Guaido, and it was very interesting how they pulled this off. They go in there and tell you that do not support the coup that is being perpetrated in Venezuela. So our hats off to this amazing stand that this lady is taking. Now they got a new article coming out, The Guardian. I caught this earlier today. The collapse of Venezuela's healthcare system could fuel spread of malaria and other diseases across the region. Jerusalem Post also jumped on this article as well, putting out their own article minutes after this one came out. And of course, what is it? It is to bring about a propaganda of fear across the world that, oh, it's a failing medical situation there in Venezuela, like it's not problems in other nations as well in South America. But no, fuel the propaganda and justify the overthrow of the government. That's exactly what the whole issue is all about. I guess that's the way it should be, right? No, it shouldn't be, but that's the way it is. This is an article that just came out to dailymail.co.uk. I'm ready for a new Cuban Missile Crisis. If you want one, Putin threatens Trump with a return to the Cold War confrontation that brought the world to the brink of nuclear Armageddon. Vladimir Putin has said that Russia is a military ready for Cuba Missile-style crisis if Donald Trump is foolish enough to want one, and that his missiles could reach the U.S. faster than theirs could hit Moscow. Putin was said he does not want any arms race with the United States, but that would have no choice but to act if Washington deployed new missiles in Europe, some of which, he says, would be able to strike Moscow within 10 to 12 minutes. Cuban Missile Crisis erupted in 1962, which we already know all about that. So again, the tensions are continually being ratcheted up around the world, especially with the world's superpowers. This was another article, the New York Times, a battle cry seldom heard these days, the Palestinian cause. It's actually an article about Al-Qaeda attacks on Israeli interests in Africa. But what's odd to me is, why do they call it Al-Qaeda? After all, we already know that Al-Qaeda has been funded by the U.S. and even Israel as well, but it's Al-Qaeda that is doing the bombing of Israeli interests there in Africa, according to the article here. And, they're blaming it, Al-Qaeda, saying these attacks in Kenya are being blamed on the way the Palestinians are being treated. But oddly enough, Israel has admitted recently in the Jerusalem Post and also General Gadi that they have armed and funded Al-Qaeda, Al-Nusra, the different jihadists that are fighting on the border against the Assad government inside of Syria. Odd, isn't it, how this works out? And of course, this article right here, U.S. arms Al-Qaeda, Saudis lie, from RT. That was a very good piece there that was done by RT that clearly shows who's the ones that fund it. So does that mean if we are funding Al-Qaeda, are we also the ones helping to fund the Al-Qaeda that is targeting Israeli interest in Africa? You have to think about it. As I mentioned earlier, Pakistan Army begins preparation for the conflict, tells hospitals to be ready. This article right here, coming out on the Times of India, says Pakistan has begun planning its war logistics and frontiers and fears of retaliation from India after Pulwama terror strike, even as Jaish-e-Mohammed chief Mossad al-Zahar asked the Imran Khan regime not to make any concessions under pressure from India. The article goes on to say that they have warned the hospital there to prepare for the wounded that would be coming in, for they expect a confrontation with India in the very near coming days. I'm Stephen Benoon. You're watching Israeli News Live. We appreciate your time, and you have a blessed evening. Shalom.